Hey everyone, today I'm here with the mechanical engineer that we're trying to train into a software engineer. How you doing?
Very good, very good.
All right. So last time we built a calculator. I threw a lot of things at you, kind of walked you through the syntax, just to give you, a brief introduction of just how to write a full, complete program. So today, I think what we're going to start with, because again, we're kind of catering this to solve those technical interview problems. I think we're going to start with a data structure called a list. So do you have any familiarity with the list structure?
Um, it's just like a concoction of things, I believe. I think.
Yeah. So I know you said you had a little bit of experience with C++. So they're really similar to arrays. They're a little bit different. I'm sure you're not familiar, but a vector in C++ is a lot similar to the way the list works in Python. But regardless, we're going to go over some basic syntax and do some of the built-in methods associated with it just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. So to start off, why don't you just create a new file in your project there? You made one called lists. So to do that, you can just, yeah, you can do it that way, or you could actually just right-click the folder in the Explorer there. Just right-click the blue and do new Python file.
Mhm.
Call it whatever you want, learn lists or something like that. Make sure you don't have a space in it.
Do I have to rename that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's at the middle of it there above run.
What's the space won't work with one?
I'm not sure. I mean, in general, when you're dealing, when you're running from the command line, it doesn't really like spaces. You generally want to start using underscores and get used to, having your finger find that. But regardless, all right, so let's get started. So just to start off, we're going to just assign a variable called my list, you can call it. Yep, and then we'll set that equal to a list of, let's just do integers. So the way that you denote a list is with the square bracket. And then you will put 5 numbers in there in any order you want, separated by commas. All right, cool. So now what you just did is you have a list of all these elements, and they're all stored in my list. So if you printed my list, it would print 19305, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So the thing with lists is they're pretty powerful. There's a lot of different levels. I should say the abstraction level that they give you make them really easy to work with. And when we get to this point in technical interviews, they're kind of going to be your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that you can do with lists are indexing. So all that means is you have a list of all these elements. It doesn't matter what type they are. So in reality, you could put strings and floats and all these different data types inside of a list, and it'll let you do that. So let's say you wanted to access the 3 in that list there. Do you know how you do that?
If I want to print it.
Yeah, sure. We can run it that way. So
the 3
why don't
is
you
the
just print the
third
3?
element.
Yep.
So you'd say print my list, and then I think it starts with 0, so I think I want 2.
Right. So why don't you run that? You're gonna have to go up to run in the top left first. Yeah, and then run. It'll ask you for the configuration. You can just click that. Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
Cool.
So right. So lists are 0 indexed. So we're gonna go over strings in a future lesson. But all of these structures, tuples, lists, and strings, they're all 0 indexed, meaning they start with 0.
Mm-hmm.
So now another cool thing that you can do with lists, which again, in the future, I'll show you some really cool ways that this is beneficial. But say, for example, you have your list here, and throughout your program, you're adding things to the end of the list all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you always want to return the last element in that list. So given what you have now, for example, how would you return the 5, the last element in there?
I could just say print my list 4.
Right. But now, like I said, say that this list is growing over time and you don't know how big it is, how would you think to do that?
Is there a way to do the last number or last thing in the
Yeah.
list?
So there's a thing called negative indexing, which is pretty unique to Python. It comes in handy a lot when we get to stacks and queues. So what you can do now is in your print statement there, you can type -1. So now I did just say that lists are negative indexed. I mean, I'm sorry, lists are 0 indexed from the front of it. But when you're calling it from the back, it starts at 1. So in this case, 5 exists at mylist index 4 and also mylist index -1. And then kind of counting from the right to the left, you have -1, -2, -3, and the first element would be at -5.
Okay.
So why don't you go ahead and print that, or I'm sorry, run that just to see if we're all good. There you go.
Cool.
All right. So why don't you add a few more things to that list? Maybe add like a string, like a name or something like that. Sure, Tony. And then add like a. Why don't you add another list in there just to prove that that works too? So you just put another square bracket, and then maybe put 2 numbers in there. Right. All right. Cool. So let's say that we have this now, a bigger list, and there's all different elements in it. So how would you access in the second list there at the end? How do you think, if we wanted the 4, how do you think you would do that?
You could do something like print my list, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then figure out how to get to the first number in that list. So, I'm not sure, but I think that's a good start, right?
Yeah. So why don't you can change, you can just use the same print there. So that's going to be the 7th, or you could do -1 again if you wanted.
Okay.
That's the last element in it.
Do we comma this and then maybe do 1 or 0?
Close. So why don't you just print -1, list of -1, just to see what that pops up.
Okay, so gives 4, 3.
So now let's start thinking like the Python interpreter, which is what's running your code here. So in this case, it's returning a list. So now think again, how do you index a list?
Yes.
Close. So instead of nesting them like that, you can actually just go bracket -1 bracket 0. So 2 kind of like next to each other, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Like this?
Yeah, let's see what that does.
Sweet.
So yeah, so you can have, if you're building out, a lot of times in these problems you're dealing with images, which are 2D lists of values depending on each pixel. You could think of it that way. So if you think of a matrix, I know you're mechanical engineering, I'm sure you have a lot of these matrices in your math classes and things. So that's how you're going to work with matrices or 2D lists in this case.
Okay.
All right. All right, cool. So now let's start working. Now that you know how to index these things, there's a couple built-in methods, they're called, associated with lists. So one of them is append. So why don't you delete your print statement there? I mentioned before, you say you have a program where you're adding things to the list all the time. In order to do that, you can just say your list, the name of your variable, and then dot append. See how it kind of pops up for you? Yeah. Okay. So now you can put whatever element you want to put in there inside of those parentheses. So say you want to put 123. Let's do 1, 2, 3. So now below that, why don't we print my list?
Okay. Run that.
Yep. And there you go. So now 1, 2, 3 is added to the list. And now it's important to note that when you call this dot append, you'll see when we work with other built-in methods, sometimes you have to reassign things, but append will directly change your variable mylist in this case. So you're saying mylist is the list object, and you're calling the append method on mylist to add something to it.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
All right, so now let's say you wanted to add something at a specific index. So instead of always pushing something to the end, let's say you wanted to add 99 to the 3rd index. So to do that, you'll do mylist.insert. If you look before you tab that out, actually, see how it has these arguments for you.
Yeah.
So self, ignore that for now. We'll talk about that in a lesson in the far future. But you have index and object.
Okay.
So just based on that, that's actually kind of like, you can think of it as just pulling from the documentation.
Yeah.
What do you think index is, and what do you think object is?
So index is this, like the 0 index would be 1, and then the object would be what I'm adding to it, I think.
Right. So why don't you add 99 to the third index?
So third, and then comma, I think.
Yep.
99.
And then we'll print my list below it. And you can keep the print you have just to show that it actually
Just
it's updated, right? Go ahead.
Okay.
Run that. There you go. So now remember, it's 0 index, so it basically just pulls apart the list, puts it in there.
Okay.
So now for this, we'll do one more little keyword, one more method for this part 1 video. There's a remove keyword. So why don't you type that out, and we'll see what it says here. It says object, right?
Yeah, object.
So now instead of removing something at an index, you can actually go right in and remove. If you know what's in your list, you can just remove something.
So
Tony, just because he's the only in there, yeah. And yeah, sensitive too. So why don't we print it again?
Okay. Tony's gone.
Yep. And we'll actually, you know what? We'll do more really useful method. So the length of it. So if you're doing a lot of, like, if you're iterating through lists, sometimes you might want to always know, like, sort of the index, and you say you're using this list and you need to know the length of it for some reason. The function called len, L-E-N. So what print before you so in this case, actually, it's not a dot something. You call. Why don't you just type print first, and then I'll walk you through the syntax. So print, and then you type len, and then open parenthesis, and then my list. So this is going to return an integer, and it's going to tell you the length of your list. Why don't you go run that?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
So now make sure you notice that this is going to be really important if you are indexing things with using this length, that there's 8 elements, but if you are in the mindset that it's a 0 index thing, it's not 7. Does that make sense? So
yeah, if
you want to get the last element, say you're not using negative indexing and you want to get the last element, you're going to have to say length of the list minus 1. So these off by 1 errors are going to be all over the place when you get started, and they're really, really common when you're doing these interview questions and all those things. And even honestly, just in practice, off by 1 errors are incredibly common. So Python's nice that you can do negative indexing and you kind of have a lot more control over this data structure, but in other languages and in other data structures, you don't always have this nice little length function built in. Like C is a great example of when you don't have that. So yeah, all right, cool. Let's we'll stop part 1 there. I think you did well. Like I said, we're just going over the basic syntax here, and then we can write a little mini program after this. We'll go over some other little bit more advanced stuff with lists.
Awesome.
All right, great.